Hi, this is Daniela Cambone, and welcome back to the Daniela Cambone Show here on ITM Trading. Well, my guest today says that although the dust is settling from this insane campaign cycle we've seen, the financial fallout is only beginning, and he fears there will be quite some unrest between now and Inauguration Day. I am thrilled to welcome to the show Porter Stansberry. You know him as the founder of MarketWise, Porter and Company, and Stansberry Research, obviously. Porter, welcome to the show. I have a funny story for you, because the first thing I'm usually asked is, what was it like working with Porter? And unfortunately, we did not get that chance because we were not at Stansberry at the same time. But I would have loved to have that opportunity.
Well, it's great to be interviewed by you finally. I saw all the work you're doing with Stansberry Research, and I was impressed. So I'm glad that I finally made your dance card.
Well, you always did. You always did. But yes, finally the stars are aligned, and here we are. And look, you've been very vocal during this entire election cycle, Porter, and you've said, like, it looks like the dust is settling. I mean, we're both in New York City right now, Porter. Seeing things are calm out there, but I believe your prophecy is things are going to get ugly soon, fast.
Yeah, I actually said several times, in public, that I thought that Trump would win in a landslide, because I had never seen a Democratic candidate less inspiring to her own party. There's a reason why she never won any primary, and that's because she's just not popular as a politician. And Trump, as you know, is a generational politician. He's incandescent. The last person I saw as powerful as he is as a politician was Bill Clinton. And I actually got to meet Trump earlier this year in Mar-a-Lago, and I was really blown away by how much charisma he has in person. Again, reminded me so much of Bill Clinton. So I was very certain that Trump would win. And I am very certain that Trump is going to strongly prefer growth over austerity. And that much like happened in Great Britain 2 or 3 years ago, when they elected a conservative party, there was a guilt panic where everybody ran out of the bond market because they were proposing to cut taxes to grow the economy faster. And I was just sure that's exactly what we were going to see here. And of course, everyone is wonderfully excited that the stock market went up so much on election day. And I wrote that on Twitter that was, the best endorsement that Trump has ever received. The country and the business community and investors are very happy he's president. Frankly, personally, so am I. But there will be costs to that, and that is that the federal government is very hamstrung. They are already spending more than they're collecting in taxes on transfer payments and interest payments. And Trump's proposals to cut taxes are going to make those deficits even larger. And that's going to cause a huge move in the bond market. And I think a lot of investors, bond interest rates have been declining since about 1981. So most of the people alive today and investing today have never seen a stock market react to much higher interest rates. And if you just do some real basic math, you assume that the economy is going to do well under Trump. So we get to 3 or 4% nominal GDP growth. Okay, that's good news. But you're also going to see inflation at 4 to 6%. And if you add those two numbers together, that's the most basic formula for figuring out what the 10-year yield will be. So if you expect 3.5% growth and 3.5% inflation, that gets you a 7% yield on 10-year. And I'm sorry, Daniela, we're at Porter & Company, we're long 42 different stocks right now. People want to paint me as a perma bear. I've never not been an investor in the stock market. But my point is, when stocks are at 28 times earnings on the S&P, when they're at all-time record highs, and you now know, ringing a bell, that interest rates are going way higher in the bond market, it is a time to be conservative. And that is the message that I've been saying. You could actually see a 50% correction in stock prices, assuming earnings are flat. Now, earnings aren't going to be flat. So let's say the market multiple corrects from 28 to 14. Nobody is calling for that. Nobody expects it. But there's no question in my mind that that is exactly what will happen over the next 2 years. Now, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you at what date the stock market is going to wake up and recognize there's a big problem in the bond market. But I can tell you it will happen. You know, investors, Danielle, I know you're smart enough to understand this, but investors have a constant choice. You can either buy bonds or you can buy stocks. And you buy stocks when the earnings yield at the stock market is much higher than the coupon rate, than the interest rate and bonds. And so you do that because you of course you want to get paid. And so right now the earnings yield in the stock market is about 3%. And
Right.
the right now the yield on the bond market is 4.5%. So I'm just telling you, it's not gonna be long before people go, maybe I should buy some of these bonds too. Now, listen, I agree with you. I'm not recommending bonds. I think bonds are a terrible choice right now because yields are going to keep going higher. So please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying sell stocks and buy bonds. I'm saying that stock prices in real terms are going to have a very difficult decade because the market multiple is going to correct. And the things that are going to do better relative to stocks are going to be things like Bitcoin, things like gold, things
Yes.
like certain kinds of stocks that really benefit from an inflationary period. Think Hershey. Hershey is one of my very best ways of hedging against an inflationary environment. And if you do a bunch of research like I've done, you'll discover that an ounce of chocolate is a better hedge against inflation than an ounce of gold.
Wait a second, Porter.
It's true. It's
Hold
absolutely
on. Hold on. Stop
it's true
everything.
it's
Okay,
true
explain
because
this one. Explain it.
no,
Well, because you're saying cocoa as a commodity. Are we talking?
it's true.
What are you?
It's true because in America, Hershey so dominates the
Right.
chocolate confectionery business that you get a whole lot of additional gain relative to brand value and distribution value that you just don't get with gold. Because of course, gold is simply a commodity. Nobody goes out and buys the Coca-Cola gold or the Hershey gold or the Philip Morris gold. So gold doesn't get the advantages of that kind of brand value that will compound with time. And
Because
so,
you're saying not everyone knows Barrick or the Newmont.
no, what I'm saying is when you buy an ounce of gold, you have no idea who made it and you don't care.
You don't.
But
Right. Well.
when you buy a cigarette or when you
Right.
buy a Zen or when you buy a soft drink
Right.
or when you buy a piece of chocolate, you care very deeply about who made it. And that gives them pricing power. And that pricing power is on top of the increase to the production costs that occur with inflation. And so investors will actually do better over time, buying something like Hershey when it's trading at 14 times earnings, a fair price, than just buying an ounce of gold. And this goes to a deeper issue, which we don't talk about very much. Most people don't understand that common stocks can be a very, very good form of asset protection. If you look at the Great Depression, there was 24 businesses that never cut their dividend. Now their share price went down. Sure, Coca-Cola share price went down 47% from top to bottom in the Great Depression, but it never cut its dividend. And in fact, of course, its dividend greatly increased over the decade of the 1930s. I'm not saying that gold didn't do better. Gold did. Homestake Mine was the best performing stock of the 1930s. Absolutely. If we end up in a real currency crisis, a real economic disaster, you're going to want to own gold. And I always tell people to own gold. But what I'm saying is if you believe like I do, we're going to have a strong economy under Trump. We're just going to have much higher rates of inflation. Then you should avoid bonds and you should be in stocks that can protect you from the increasing price level.
Now, okay, lots of good food for thought there. Let's break it down a bit. So what I'm hearing from you is, okay, it's important to be cherry picking your stocks at this moment right now. And obviously, I know you have to subscribe to Porter and Company to find out what companies you like, Porter. But what do you feel is an equivalent to, you mentioned Hershey, a legacy stock? Is there a company, a newcomer today that has that clout?
Yes, it's Philip Morris actually. It's Philip Morris with Zen is going to take over the world over the next decade, and it's so ironic because Philip Morris, of course, has invented more great consumer products than any other business in history. Most people don't know Philip Morris invented light beer. They bought the formula for Miller Lite from a bankrupt Chicago brewer in 1972, and they rolled out Miller Lite in 1975, and in just 2 years, it was the second best-selling beer in the entire world. So these are the kind of businesses that you want to have as the foundation of your portfolio. I'd also tell you really simply, the last about 20 years of my life, I have made a very detailed and constant study of the property and casualty insurance sector. And you and I both know Rick Rule, and I hold him in very high regard. I'm assuming that you do as well. And Rick
Just
has
a little, but
Rick has told me privately that he's made more money in property and casualty insurance than he has in any other business. And as you know, he's made a lot of money.
Insurance.
Yep. So P&C insurance. Why? Well, because P&C companies, they're finance companies. Finance companies generally do very well during inflations. And it's because they are able to borrow short and lend long and make money on that spread. But the way insurance companies do it is even more advantage because they get all the cash now. And they don't have to pay out the claims until much later. And much later, those dollar claims are going to be worth a whole lot less in real terms. And in the meantime, they get to keep everything they make in the middle. So if yields on bonds go from 4% to 7%, like I believe that they are, then the income that those insurance companies are going to make on their bond portfolios are going to go way, way up. And so P&C insurance is a fantastic way to protect yourself from inflation, as are really top-notch, well-positioned consumer product companies. And then, of course, there's lots of other things in between. I've been very, very bullish on energy, and I believe that over the next decade, you're going to see an unprecedented, absolute renaissance in energy of all types. The amount of electricity that America has been generating has been stagnant now for almost 20 years. We are generating the same amount of electricity as we were generating in 2007. And a big part of that has been the rise of regulation and has been all of the difficulties in the financial markets. There hasn't been capital available for huge $100 billion plus energy projects. Well, Trump is going to change all that. And I believe the amount of electricity America can produce is going to grow, not by 100%, not by 200%, but by 700, 800, even 1,000%. And nobody sees this coming right now. And of course, the way they're going to do it is going to be a mixture between coal, natural gas, and nuclear. And people who argue about which one, it's all of the above.
Well, I was going to ask you, are you bullish uranium?
Very, of course. Yeah. And I think that we have, and I'm happy to name the stock, I think that we have by far, we've been an investor in BWXT now for two and a half years. And it's clearly the leading company when it comes to actually delivering modular nuclear reactors. They're already doing this in Poland, and they've been doing it for the United States military for more than 50 years. So all these people who are like, oh, well, someday we'll have small modular reactors, we already have them. So that if you want to be in nuclear, sure, you can buy uranium and you can buy uranium stocks. I like to be in the companies that are owning the technologies, that have the patents, and that I believe have real good pricing power. Now, you might argue with me that there are uranium mines that have pricing power, and you could be right. I just prefer to be in the operating businesses. I think they have over time better margins and better return on equity for investors.
But Porter, just to answer many inquiring minds, are going to say, what about the Magnificent Seven? Look at NVIDIA that just took over Intel's spot. What happens to these guys under a Trump presidency?
Boy, that is a really tough question. My tech analyst, David Lashmet, and I have done work on NVIDIA since the mid 2010s. So we recommended it for the first time in 2017. And over the summer, when there was a big correction in the Magnificent Seven, I recommended NVIDIA and my new company at Porter & Company. And we also published a really good 7-part series called The Parallel Processing Revolution. And in terms of the valuation, NVIDIA's earnings growth definitely justifies its price. People keep trying to compare it to Cisco and the internet bubble of 2000, and the comparison doesn't hold water because NVIDIA just has a much, much better business than Cisco ever did. I mean, they have gross margins in the high 70s, and they have earnings growth and revenue growth that justifies the valuations. Rather than talking just specifically about the valuation of that stock, I wish investors would focus on the nature of the change in computing. A lot of people think to themselves, oh, what's the difference? They're going from Intel to NVIDIA, chip's a chip. But the revolution that's underway as we go from serial processing to parallel processing is a bigger change in compute power than we went from the abacus to the first computer chip. It's very hard for most people to get their minds around a 10,000-fold annual improvement to compute. And the resulting energy infrastructure that has to change and the resulting software infrastructure that has to change. This will be a multi-decade technological change. And it's hard to imagine, but you and I will not recognize computer interface in another 10 years. It'll be unlike anything that we can currently imagine. So I am very optimistic about the technology. I'm very optimistic about the build out of the electricity that's going to be required. And I'm very optimistic about NVIDIA's hold on that market, not just because of their chips, but most importantly, because of their software.
So what's your take on the AI race then, Porter? China's beating America right now. How does, or will it change?
It's like saying, how will the internet change America? And we're in the year 1996. I mean, I can tell you that just about everything is going to change about the way you interface with information and media and computers. But I can't even really begin to look at how it's actually going to play out in fact. But there will be very many winners. And of course, there will be many losers as well. It's a very exciting time for computer science. It's a very exciting time for software. And it's also a very challenging time for big technology companies that are going to have to invest unbelievable sums of money to remain competitive. I've seen the most recent forecast from Morgan Stanley. They're calling for something like $300 billion in CapEx from the major tech firms, with both Microsoft and Amazon expected to spend more than $100 billion next year in 25. So these are very real and big changes. There's no question.
I mean, is it something you fear? I mean, we've seen Elon Musk pounding the table, warning us about the dangers of AI, how it's the most dangerous thing we could be, up against. Is it something you fear or welcome?
I think it's great. It's interesting that so many people perceive me as being somehow radically bearish because, I got into the financial advisory business by being a leading writer about tech stocks in the late 1990s. And the most successful tech report, or really any report I ever wrote, was called The New Railroad Across America. And it described how the original internet infrastructure was being built out along railroad right-of-ways all over the United States. And what's happening today is very much the railroad part two. There's an entire new technological infrastructure that's being built, and it's going to radically change the way just about everything happens in America. Everything's going to get better. The interface will be better and faster. The memory will be larger and more sophisticated. I don't know if you've played around with it or not, but have you played around with AI yet? There's this new thing called Notebook LM that will make a podcast about any data that you want to send it. It's almost like magic. And that's what's so neat about this technology.
I think what drives me nuts with it is that I know when someone's writing to me using ChatGPT, or, in the field of journalism, so many folks are just relying on this, like summarize this video. So for me, it's quite obvious when it's written by ChatGPT. And I don't know if it's a really big discussion, Porter, of what it can replace and can't replace. But right now, a lot of it just bothers me, I think, on the writing front.
I do not think that computers will ever be able to create art. I think that there is something uniquely human about that. And I think that'll be an interesting test. But there's no question that they're past, for example, the Turing test. If you're
Right.
interfacing with well-trained AI, you cannot tell the difference between that and a person. But you can definitely tell the difference when it comes to art. And as a writer myself, it's very easy for me to detect. So I'm not really worried about the future for people who write advertising or who write art, who write novels. I don't think that those things will be very easily replaced by computers. But I do think that there are endless amounts of basic intelligent tasks that are going to be replaced by AI in the next decade. No one will ever have to hire a lawyer again for a contract. No one will ever have to hire an accountant again to do their taxes. There's a lot of white collar jobs that are going to go away because AI is going to be able to do it for free and for faster.
I want to, before we get back to talking about America, I was going to say, maybe people think you're bearish, Porter, because you wrote that bestseller, End of America, that I don't know how many copies was sold in 2011. So maybe that's why there's this notion, well, Porter's just been bearish on America for the longest time.
By the way, I am a little proud of that. That actually sold more than $1 billion worth of investment research.
Right.
So if I could only write one of those every other year, I'd be a lot better off.
Right. But what do you say to the critics who say, well, you were calling the end of America over a decade ago?
Yeah, well, I would say,
but America still keeps
if you go back and
being the leader here.
If you go back and read that original thing that I wrote, it is amazing how many of those things happened. America did lose its AAA rating, as I predicted. We did see an enormous rise in violence. We did see an enormous rise in government authoritarian stuff. If you had told people in 2011 that the federal government was going to lock everybody in their homes for 2 weeks and mandate that they take an experimental vaccine, no one would have believed you. But all those things did happen. And look at the rise in violence and in crime. Look at the rise in pornography. Look at the rise in gambling. All of that stuff is what I predicted and that 2011 documentary. And I predicted it because those are all things that you see in society that are correlated to big increases in inflation due to monetary corruption by the government. When the government starts buying its own bonds with its own paper money, society breaks down in these ways. And it happens in every culture, everywhere in the world, every time throughout history. So knowing that these things were going to happen was an easy prediction to make. And most people just don't get the link between the corruption of the financial system with the corruption of the society, but they are absolutely fundamentally linked. And by the way, those problems are not going to stop. What do you think the future for America is when you know that every single 18-year-old boy in our country has unlimited pornography and unlimited gambling right there on his cell phone?
As the mother of twin boys, Porter, it terrifies me.
It's not going to be good for our birth rate, and it's not going to be good for the gap between the rich and the poor. You're going to see a more and more bifurcation of American society from the people that have healthy habits and normative behavior, who grew up with two good parents and who do the right things with their lives, and everybody else. And the everybody else is going to grow and grow and grow and become more and more of a cancer. It's true today. It is true today that Baltimore, Maryland is more dangerous than Beirut. Yeah,
I believe it.
That problem is.
I believe it.
That problem is not going to be solved by more and more federal government spending. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Well, I think that just you can make the case of how the family structure and unit is probably, there's never been a time that it's so crucial and important. Would you agree with that, Porter?
I think it's always been the most important thing in society. Societies that allow families to flourish are societies that flourish. Societies that allow families to disintegrate. And there's no question that all is happening in America. There's a consequence to the whole financialization of our economy. And it's not going to be good for people in general. It's going to be very good for the rich, and it's going to be very, very bad for the middle class. And so I've been trying to warn people about this for 15 years now? And the prescriptions I've been giving are always the same. You can't rely on your wages to safeguard you. You can't rely on the promises of the government to safeguard you. You have to be an asset owner. You have to become an investor. And if you had done anything like what I said to do, whether it was buy Bitcoin or buy gold or buy timber or buy property and casualty insurance companies or buy Nvidia, you're fine. You can clearly deal with these challenges. But for the average person, they've been wiped out. The average person in America has been destroyed. In the last decade, they've seen the value of their wages and their cash savings decline by more than 50%. That is devastating for people.
What concerns me is that you are fearful of or you're warning us of the unrest, the civil unrest we could see post-election. I mean, I thought of it walking to the studio here in the middle of Times Square yesterday, Porter, but it was surprisingly a very peaceful day. I know you're in New York City as well. We heard Harris's concession speech where she spoke about a peaceful transition of power.
Yes.
Why do you feel?
Well, let's step back for a second. I was very certain that Trump would win the election, and I was certain about that just by walking around New York City, walking around Florida, walking around California. The people who had previously been anti-Trump were now pro-Trump, and the switch was massive, massive. But they tried to assassinate him twice. And so people who are like, well, Porter, you were worrying about unrest and it didn't happen. Imagine what would have happened if he had been shot in the head. You would have seen unbelievable violence in this country because there was a majority of people who wanted him to be our president. I mean, a Republican candidate hasn't won the popular vote in America in 25 years, something like that.
Right.
Like, he is an enormously popular political leader. And if they had killed him, and listen, I don't have any proof, right? But you can't tell me that the Secret Service wasn't in on the fact that the kid climbed onto the roof in the middle of broad daylight and people are shouting, there's a shooter over there, and nobody bothers to get Trump off the stage for like 7 minutes or something. It's people will believe anything. That was very clearly a well-coordinated political assassination attempt by the deep state. And if they had pulled it off, I think you would have seen absolute chaos in this country. People would have rightfully been furious, and they would have done some serious damage. So luckily it didn't happen. And I don't think that you'll see any of that. I think that there will be a peaceful transition of power now, as long as nobody shoots him.
Gosh, well, no one would absolutely want to see that. So I guess bringing it home, Porter, people watching are going to say, okay, if this is the landscape Porter's painting, you spoke a little bit about, what we should be doing to protect ourselves. How can we, take control of a situation we otherwise have no control over?
Yeah.
So like you said, careful with stock selection. You like Bitcoin.
Yes. There's an answer to this, and it's been around for a very long time. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but Harry Browne was a libertarian philosopher who, in the 1970s, foresaw all the things that were happening with the dollar, and he wrote several very famous books. But the one I think is the best is called "How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World." We can't control what the federal government does with the paper dollar standard. We can't control that. But we can control what we do with our own assets. And, Harry created the plan for all of this, which is you own 4 buckets of assets. You own stocks, you own bonds, you own gold, and you own cash. And I would say that the bucket for bonds bonds just aren't investable right now. They're just not. So I would say that if you're an investor, you want to make sure you own good stocks. You want to make sure you own gold and Bitcoin, and you want to make sure you own plenty of cash. And I think the cash part is the hardest thing for people because they're like, well, if I own cash, it's going to get diluted because of the printing.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, I know.
Right.
I know, but you can get like 4% on your cash in a lot of places. That'll protect you from inflation, and it'll give you the opportunity. There will be a market correction. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you when it'll be. But
what's the hedge there, Porter? What's the hedge there? Why wouldn't you just allocate that cash into gold?
Well, you can, but gold. The way this portfolio strategy works is that you're using your bonds to hedge your stocks. So if stock earnings fall, the bond market will rally. So your stocks are hedged by your bonds. And then you're using your gold to hedge your bonds because inflation will kill the bonds. So then gold hedging your bonds. And then what hedges your gold? What hedges your gold is cash. People forget. And how much did gold fall between September and November of 2008?
To then come back.
I had to do a wellness check on my buddy Doug Casey. And I called him up and I said, I'm really worried about you because there's been about a half a dozen major gold investors who committed suicide this week. Are you all right? Oh, he says, Porter, oh, my portfolio looks like a medieval battlefield at dusk.
Well, we love Doug over here. I read somewhere, so you like physical gold. Is it true you've never sold an ounce of gold?
Yeah, I've never sold an ounce of gold. I can't remember the last time I bought a large amount of gold, but I have never sold any.
Because you see it as creating generational wealth?
I just see it as the ultimate backstop. You know, if I have to grab my go bag and get out of town in a night, you know, I can carry a couple $1 million in gold with me.
Porter, I thoroughly enjoyed hearing your thoughts today. I'm happy we were finally able to speak, and I'm sure the audience is going to be thrilled that you've joined us today. Where can people find you these days? I know you have Porter and Company, but if people want to read your newsletters, where should they go?
Yeah, we have portersdailyjournal.com. It's a free e-letter. You're familiar with my writing every day. portersdailyjournal.com. I'm also, of course, on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, like everybody else. Porter Stansby on Twitter, and Porter Daily Journal.
I just followed you, so.
Great. Well, I hope that you're entertained.
And finally, I'm just curious. I mean, you said you met Donald Trump and he was quite charismatic. You know, we hear that quite a bit. I mean, did you have a chance to really interact with him and share stories?
Yeah, he joined us for a brief moment, maybe 5 minutes or so during breakfast. And we have a mutual friend who introduced us. And he was very taken with my wife.
With your wife?
Yeah, among other things. He was very appreciative of my wife's beauty, which was very nice. And we talked about golf, and we talked about business, and we talked about all the things that are wrong with the country. But I found him very personable, very likable, and I genuinely think that the travails that the Democrats put him through, the trials and the assassination attempts and stuff like that, I think they actually made him a much more likable figure for most Americans. So I hope that I expect him to be a very good president, and I expect that the economy will be much stronger than people expect. And I think also so will rates of inflation. And so if you're a macro person or you want to position your portfolio accordingly, that's my best advice.
Porter Stansberry, folks. Appreciate you, Porter. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here finally.
And thanks for watching. We'll have more great content coming your way on the Daniela Cambone Show here on ITM Trading. Be sure to sign up at danielacambone.com, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That's it for me. We'll see you soon. Hi, everyone. Daniela Cambone here for ITM Trading. You know, I have had the privilege and the honor of doing a career I love for close to 20 years, and I have met thousands of the most insightful and intelligent people on the planet. There is just so much wisdom, lessons, and insights I have gained in terms of building an incredible portfolio and preserving your wealth. And we want to share those insights with you today. We have put together a free report that highlights some of the best knowledge I have acquired through all these years. You can get it today for free at DaniReport.com. Again, that's Dani, D-A-N-I, report.com. Don't miss out. Get it now.